Judging by the comments in previous videos, this is a very contentious issue, and I really want to get it right, which means that I can't do the thing that I normally do in my videos, which is ad-libbing all of the dialogue. So I'm going to read this video from a script, but please bear with me because it's important. There's a lot of confusion surrounding the issue of open source and 3D printing. Understandably so. The issue is a nuanced one. So let's try to untangle the mess as simply as possible because there are open source violations and there are copycats, and we, as the consumers in this space, have a lot of power to ensure that the right things happen. To start the conversation, we need to lay the groundwork with a few sentences of history. Open source is a movement which was started by Richard Stallman as a protection against the monopolistic, some would say evil, practices of Microsoft. The GNU GPL 3.0 open source license agreement basically says this: I've created a thing. While it is my intention to sell this thing, I'm sharing all of the details about this thing and how I made it with the world. If anyone builds another thing using any of the pieces of my thing, it is required that you share all of the details about your thing and how you made it with the world. It might not be obvious to everyone why giving away all of the details about your creation would be a protection against the monopoly. But you see, Microsoft has a nasty tendency to find promising things that have little or no intellectual property protections on them. Microsoft takes said things, improves upon said things, and patents the improvements. Then, whenever anyone else tries to improve the original promising thing separate from Microsoft, Microsoft sues them, thus expanding Microsoft's monopoly. You can imagine how much this would piss off the original creator of the promising thing. It's like when your boss takes credit for your contribution to the company and then gets promoted for the good work. Anyone with a modicum of business savvy can immediately see the problem with sharing all of the details about your thing and how you made it. You are teaching the copycats how to make your product. There is no patent protection or trade secrets. Nothing is stopping the thieves from duplicating your product, a product which you spent a ton of time perfecting. You didn't do all of this work for nothing. You need to be compensated for all of the hours you spent developing the product before you could start selling it. The copycats have no such debt to repay, and they can immediately start selling the copied things that they are making. They can thus undercut your price and put you out of business. This is the reason why Chinese companies are so reluctant to release their designs open source, even if it costs them good PR for being in violation of the GPL. They live in a den of thieves over there in China, and they know that their open source product will be cloned. Look at all of the copies of the Ender 3 which have flooded the market since that printer became so popular. Now, people who develop open source products tend to be smarter than your average bear. Some open source companies have figured out clever ways to make a living from open source technologies. For instance, have you ever wondered why Marlin is so convoluted? Now, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that it is to motivate 3D printer manufacturers to pay the developer of Marlin to build them a tailor-made firmware for their printer. They don't have the skills to do it in-house, so why not hire the guy who wrote the code? It's a great way to ensure their firmware build is top-notch. They could hire someone else who might succeed, but why do that when they can hire the supreme expert in charge of the entire codebase? That's one way that he could be getting compensated for creating the firmware on almost all of our printers. The bottom line is that open source is good for us, the consumers. It keeps these technologies out of the clutches of monopolies. Monopolies tend to price gouge. If you think $1,000 is too much for a 3D printer, how about $35,000, which was the going price for a Stratasys FDM printer just 10 years ago, before Stratasys' monopolies expired along with their patents. But the pendulum swings too far when the copycats thrive. When only copycats can make money, nobody will develop anything new. Who would choose to be the sucker spending the time to make the thing which will make everyone else rich? Stratasys already made this decision. That's why they aren't developing any new FDM 3D printers. Their FDM machines have the same functionality now as they did 10 years ago. Clearly, they have made the decision not to spend another dime on research and development for FDM technology. It's not going to make them any money, so they won't do it. The company that invented the technology has stopped developing the technology because they see the open source community as the copycats. This whole issue boils down to one simple statement. Innovations are good, copycats are bad. If you take an open source product and improve upon it, you are not a copycat, you are an innovator, and your product is the better product which we all should be buying. If you take an open source product and use the documentation as a blueprint to make a clone or nearly a clone with no significant improvements, you are a copycat, aka a thief. If you take an open source product and value engineer it to be the least expensive it can be while still retaining the original functionality, that's a tough call. The improvements to the product in price seem to be an innovation, but functionally there is no difference, so no actual innovation. You didn't help make 3D printers better, you just made them cheaper. But that probably means that the quality is cheaper as well, and that's not good for anyone. Okay, let's talk about how this affects companies which we all know in the 3D printing space, starting with Duet. Now, there are straight up carbon copies, but lesser quality versions of this board coming from China. These clones are the poster child product for the entire conversation up to this point in the video. Don't buy clones, unless you want to be looked down upon by the people who support the original creators. Is your integrity really only worth $50? This control board from the Ender 3 is derivative of a Melzi control board. It has been stripped down from the original design to be the minimum it can be and still run a 3D printer. This is absolutely a value engineered copycat product. I would tell you to go buy an original Melzi board instead of this copycat, but it looks like the Western company that was producing those boards went out of business. The original product was developed 6 years ago in 2012, so this is a copycat of some pretty outdated tech. BL Touch. This is not an open source product. If you buy a cloned version of this, you are flat out supporting thievery. Is your integrity really only worth $20? Now, onto the open source elephant in the room, Prusa. He has been the beneficiary of open source far more than he has contributed, starting with the i3 frame design, which is a modification of the Mendel with the moving bed in the y-axis and the x-axis rails mounted on the z-axis screws. Now, we've all heard of the Prusa Mendel, but did you know that a guy named Ed Sells actually invented the Mendel frame design? Therefore, all of these overhead gantry, y-axis moving bed printers on the market today are derivative of the Mendel and not the Prusa. Furthermore, many of these printers from China use an entirely different motion system from the Prusa with Delrin pulleys riding in aluminum extrusions. This is an advancement, and since Creality released the file as open source, nobody can claim this printer is a copycat frame design unless they also want to call Prusa a copycat for his Mendel and i3 designs. There is a list of other innovations that people want to give Prusa credit for. The fact is that he didn't develop almost any of the features on his printer. The list is long, and so it's easier to just talk about the open source innovations which Prusa does seem to be responsible for. PCB bed heating and the PEI powder-coated spring steel detachable bed. According to the research that I've done, that's it. Every other innovation on a Prusa is an idea he mined from the internet or purchased from a subcontractor. I'll post a list in the description. Prusa deserves credit though. He is a great curator. The Prusa printer is a fantastic assemblage of innovations, but people need to stop accusing every 3D printer that looks vaguely similar to a Prusa of being a copycat. That's simply not the case. Now, you are probably wondering why I care so much about this subject. Why I say these words knowing that I will suffer the negative effects on my viewership. I'm an inventor myself. I have a patent on this rotating buckle for bags. It's a tough game that we inventors are forced to play. Most of us end up in debt chasing our innovations. I'm just trying to protect my fellow inventrepreneurs. Also, I love seeing the tech develop. I love seeing 3D printers get better every year. It gives me happiness and hope. So I'm just trying to do my part to facilitate that to keep happening. But I doubt I will speak on this subject again. I'm done harming the success of this channel by speaking the truth. Okay, this video was brought to you by the generous support of these Patreon supporters. Give them a thank you in the comments or join their ranks. Thanks for watching. See you next time.